I'm going to show you guys how to do duplicate stitch over a finished garment. In this case, we're going to be adding a heart onto a hat. And this is my Bentley hat pattern that you can download for free on my website. So we're going to be starting with a finished Bentley hat, and we're going to be adding a duplicate stitch heart over the top of the hat. Duplicate stitch is a fun way to add something, add some color to a finished product. It will create a pretty thick garment or accessory because you'll be basically adding a whole nother layer of yarn to something already made. But it's a great way for beginners who want to add something interesting to a finished piece of work. It's a great way for you to get started doing something fun to basic knits. So let's go ahead and get started. So when we're reading the duplicate stitch heart chart, we're going to notice that it's across 11 stitches, and it goes up 13 rows. So we want to make sure we're centering the heart where we want it to be on our garment or accessory. So basically, I'm going to start about 2 rows above the brim, and it'll go up like this. But just make sure you're measuring kind of how wide and how tall your overall thing is that you're adding to your hat. So you make sure you have enough room and it's kind of centered where you want it to be. So when we read charts here like this, it's best to start on row 1, and we're going to be working back and forth like this all the way up. And then when we get up to, and when we're done with row 10, where it kind of separates, we're going to work row 11 here and come back, and then come back over here and work this side. All right, so when we do duplicate stitch, we are going to follow the direction of the yarn. So you're gonna start from behind, and I cut a pretty long piece of yarn. It can be frustrating to work with yarn that's really long, but that requires you to rejoin new yarn less. So we'll see how far we get with this, and I'll show you how to do it. So basically, I'm starting 2 rows up from the brim. That's 1 and that's 2. So basically, we want to pull the yarn through the bottom here. And we want it to come up in between the center V that we're going up into. So I'm going to pull up here. And just so you can see, we're going to be working up and around, and we're going to be doing this stitch. So I am going to pull the yarn through, leaving a little tail at the back. And you got to kind of work slowly so you don't get things tangled. So we've got our tail. And I am going to follow this loop. So I need to go behind these 2 stitches, and then I'm going to be going down into the same hole I came up. So we have our first stitch done now at the bottom. So now I'm going to go up and across this way. So I need to make sure I'm looking at the work correctly. And I'm going to want to come up so that my needle is coming up here. I'm going to work this stitch, then this stitch, then this stitch. Okay? So because we ended behind, we have to come up, and I'm going to make sure that I come up in that stitch here. So I've got the first half of that 1 stitch done, and now I insert the needle into the same place I came up, and then at the same time I'm going to come up into the bottom of the next stitch. So I'm ready to work the next stitch right away. So I'm at the bottom of the next stitch I need to work on. I'm going to come up between the two bars of the stitch above it to get my loop through the back. Don't pull too tight, because you want to make, if you pull too tight, then you'll see the yarn below it. And then I'm going to go into the same place I came up and then also get ready to start the next stitch. So I need to be at the bottom of the next stitch. Okay, so now I'm ready to make that third stitch on row 2. I'm going to come across the bar. Whoop. This is to get the top part of the stitch going. And again, when you have a long piece of yarn here, you got to work really carefully and patiently. So now I need to go down. And since this is my last stitch in my row, I'm going to look at my chart on row 3 and make sure I line myself up for the first stitch. So I just completed the last stitch on row 2. Now I'm going to move up to row 3 and work back across that way. So I'm going to insert the needle in the bottom here, but then come up into the bottom of the next row so I can work that stitch. Okay, so now I'm going to work the duplicate stitch back across. I'm gonna try to get this zoomed in here so you can see exactly how I go into the stitches a little bit better. Okay. All right, so I've come up in the bottom of the stitch. This is the stitch I need to work, so I'm at the bottom. Now I'm going to work kind of backwards because we're going back the other way. So in order to get the white on this stitch, I have to insert my needle. I have to follow this loop. And in order to follow this loop, I need to get the stitch going behind. And you know, you've got to, it can be hard because the yarn can split. But so I've got the stitch, I've got the needle behind the stitch above it to follow that loop of where the yarn goes. So I've made half of that. Now I'm going to go back into the same stitch. I'm left-handed, so this can be hard for me to come back around this way. I'm going to go back into the same stitch I just worked and come up, ready to do the next stitch, which is this one. Okay. Again, being careful not to get it too tight here. Okay, so now we're ready to work the next stitch. And we're just going to continue following the chart and working across. I'm going to come up into that next stitch. And you can adjust the yarn as you need to. Okay. I'm going to follow the loop behind. Insert the needle where I came up and go to the base of the next stitch. So so far I've done 3 stitches. In this row I need 5, so I have 2 more stitches to go to be done with this row. Coming back up to the base of the next stitch. And this is my last stitch. I'm going to go into underneath those 2 bars at the top of the stitch. And then, because this is the last stitch for the 3rd row, I'm going to look at the 4th row now and make sure I come up here. So I need to come up over here to start working this next stitch to work my way back. So I'm going to insert the needle here. I'm going to flip this a little bit. Insert the needle at the bottom and then make sure I come up 1 row up and 1 stitch over to work the base of the heart. Okay. All right, so now I have 1, 2, 3 rows done, and I'm coming up to work across the 4th row. And you're going to keep repeating this where you go back and forth, making sure you follow the stitch through the bottom and the top all the way across. All right, I am finishing up the 6th row here, and now I will be working back for 7, 8, 9, 10. Those are just 4 rows right on top of each other. And I'll show you how this is looking. And then I also, so with this one, I'm nearing the end of the yarn too, so I wanted to show you how I join a new yarn. So I'm finishing 6 here, and I need to now come up and work 7. So I'm going to just basically go in where I came out, but then I have to come right back up to do this stitch right here. And I'm nearing the end of my yarn. We'll see how far we get here. And you know, you might have to shift the yarn around a little bit to make it look good, make sure it's loose enough. So let's go back this way because we're going to be working back across now. So now we're at the point where we work just back and forth across 4 rows straight up without expanding anymore. Let's see, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 are all the same rows. Okay. So we're gonna go, but I probably have about 1 or 2 more stitches left until I need to add a new piece of yarn. And it's actually very simple. You can just weave the ends in. At the end, I'll show you, whoops, let's go the right direction. So now I'm just working across. All right. I'm going to insert the needle in the bottom, come back up for the next stitch. All right, so this time, because I'm nearing the end, I am going to insert the needle at the bottom and not come back up, okay? So I'm gonna pull this through and we're gonna flip this over. I am going to release the yarn. Let's just take a look what it looks like on the inside. It looks pretty neat because you're just following the stitches. So basically, you know, you can just weave this in at the end. So I'm going to cut another piece of yarn. Make this kind of long again. We still have a lot of stitching left. So I've got a long piece of yarn here. I would say, you know, work with as long as you're kind of comfortable with so you don't have to join too many pieces. But we'll thread this through. And we'll get started with second piece of yarn. All right, so I'm going to look at it on the right side and just kind of come back up. I need to come back up at the base of that stitch right there. So I'm gonna find it and come back up, making sure I leave a little bit of a tail here to weave back in. That looks good. All right, and now we'll just continue working back across. So you're basically going through, if you can see, the bottom of the V at the top of the stitch. You're going in there, and then you're going through the upside down V down below. That's the upside down V. So all right, so now I have finished row 10 over here, and since I am currently on this side of the heart, I am going to work back and forth on the left side of the heart, and then I'll probably cut the yarn and join over here and work back and forth on this side of the heart. All right, now I've finished the left side, and I've just rejoined the yarn over here on row 11, and I'm going to work back and forth, and then we're almost done. All right, I've got the last two stitches, last stitch I'm trying to finish up here. My yarn is really short, but I'm going to see if I can eke this out here. And there we go. We've got our heart on our hat.